Welcome to the Court of History. I'm Sean Wilentz with my compadre, Sidney Blumenthal, on Court of History, where politics and the Constitution and law and journalism converge. We're here today to talk about violence in politics, violence in American politics, the upturn in political violence in the United States. Violence has always been an aspect of American politics. We all know that. But something terrible seems to have occurred. A turn has been taken that is particularly worrisome these days. Under the Trump regime, for example, we hear that the House of Representatives is in terror. It's not simply a matter of political intimidation. It's a matter of actual physical terror. Not just the House, actually the House and the Senate. Lisa Murkowski of Alaska has made it very clear that her Republican colleagues actually live in physical fear of this administration. And now we've had a spread of political violence outside of Washington, most recently with the case of what happened in Minnesota. To talk about that, I have my compadre, Sidney Blumenthal, is here to talk about what happened and the reaction to what happened among the Republicans. So, Sid, here we are. It's a terrible time, and I wondered if you wanted to just get us into talking about not only what happened in Minneapolis, but what the Republican reaction was.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. There's been a false equivalence that somehow there are violent incidents on all sides, and somehow the result of the debate and its tenor has created this atmosphere. Actually, this is a feature, not a bug, of the Trump era and of Trump, who repeatedly incites violence, not least January 6th, but also in his rhetoric constantly. And then after various violent incidents, deplores them and then ramps up again. What happened in Minneapolis?
I'm going to interrupt for a second just to say that you have written a very important column about all of this for The Guardian. So viewers should be aware of that column as well.
Yes, people can read my column in The Guardian about this. On the early morning hours of June 14th, a man named Vance Luther Bolter disguised himself as a police officer, wore body armor and a latex face mask, and went from one house to another of Democratic state legislators. He critically wounded one state senator and shot his wife as well, and then went on to the next house and murdered Melissa Hortman, the former House Speaker, and her husband. He fled, and he left a kill list in his car that the police recovered of more than 70 names of all Democratic legislators and state officials and federal officials, as well as sites of women's healthcare centers and Planned Parenthood donors. And then he sent a text message to his family: "Dad went to war last night." So immediately following all this, the right-wing internet swarm ramped up and put out conspiracy theories that Tim Walz, the governor, the vice presidential candidate in 2024, was responsible for this, and that he was somehow the hitman. This perpetrator, this alleged murderer, Bolter, had been on the state board, of which there are hundreds of positions, had been appointed by a previous governor. And one right-wing person on X with more than 1 million followers wrote, "Did Tim Walz have her," meaning the former House Speaker, "executed to send a message?" Elon Musk, of course, drugs or no drugs, jumped in and said the far left is murderously violent. Laura Loomer, who is sometimes an intimate of Donald Trump, tweeted that Walz should be detained by the FBI. And then Mike Lee, the senator from Utah, decided that this was the signal for him to tweet the disinformation.
And what disinformation was that? What did he say?
Within hours of the murders, while the killer was still loose, the assassin, he tweeted, "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way." And then about a half hour later, he tweeted, "Nightmare on Wall Street." He misspelled Tim Walz's name, but blaming Tim Walz essentially. And he didn't have sympathy. He was not shocked. And he was the character assassin.
Mm-hmm.
And he felt a compulsion to push himself in to this controversy. And of course, he knows better.
Well, and normally, I mean, these things have happened in the past, but normally political leaders from both sides of the aisle would join in saying, deploring what happened and saying that this political violence has no place in the United States. Now, the Trumpites, including Senator Lee, have not simply not done that. They've actually turned it into political fodder in the cruelest way, actually. The story that you tell is a chilling one. Add into the fact, for example, that the woman, the wife of the public official who wasn't murdered but was very, very badly shot, actually dove to protect her daughter from being killed by this man.
Yeah, it's a terrible story. It's a great tragedy, and from opposite, characters, Vance Bolter, the assassin, and Mike Lee both represent aspects of the Trump universe.
So tell us about Vince Bolter.
Yeah, Vince Bolter is an anti-abortion fanatic. He's a Christian nationalist and a fervent Trump supporter. So he grew up in a very traditional middle-class family in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota, which is southeast of Minneapolis. He seemed to have a happy, successful boyhood and young manhood. He was the captain of the high school basketball team. He was voted most courteous, most friendly. His father was the baseball coach in a high school where baseball was important, and the father was just sort of distinguished. He was the Minnesota State High School Baseball Coach Association Hall of Fame member. So, and then soon, Bolter discovers evangelical Pentecostalism, and his friends describe him in the local park living in a tent and shouting sermons to passersby. He receives a real degree from a state university, but then he goes to a place called Christ for the Nations Institute. It's a Texas Bible school, but it's not your ordinary kind of school. It sort of emerged from a faith healing group founded by a guy named Gordon Lindsay. And on the wall of the school, engraved, is a statement from this founder: everyone ought to pray at least one violent prayer each day. So who is Gordon Lindsay, the eminence of this sect? He's the founder of something called the Anglo-Saxon Federation in the 1930s and 40s, which is an anti-Semitic organization that was allied with the Nazis, and they distributed Henry Ford's anti-Semitic tracts, literally Nazi propaganda. They preached that God would punish Franklin D. Roosevelt, and they had a curious doctrine called British Israelism, that the Anglo-Saxons, not the Jews, are the chosen people of God. And that morphed into something called Christian identity, which also had a racial basis of a hierarchy of races, with blacks on the bottom, of course. Now, Bolter goes there in 1990, and he gets a degree in practical theology, and he wanders off as a missionary to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He claims he's running a security firm, no known clients. He delivers sermons denouncing abortion and, transsexuals and so on. He says he wandered all over the Middle East trying to convert people. No one knows. What he really did, for which there's a record, is he managed a 7-Eleven store. He managed a gas station. And then he took courses in mortuary science and worked transporting bodies to a funeral home. And he quit that. And he became something of a spirit warrior and drifter. Then he created a security firm he called Praetorian Guard, of which his wife was listed as CEO. He's head of security. And he buys 2 cars and outfits them as police cars, which he used for these crimes. And he develops the kill list. And he's apparently thinks he's a spirit warrior carrying out a mission for God. And he's lost it. He's a lost soul. And in order to save the unborn, it's necessary to kill the living. And into this jumps somebody from a completely different background.
This is Mike Lee. Now, the parallel or the not so parallel lives of Messrs. Bolter and Lee. Tell us about Mike Lee.
Well, Mike Lee is somebody who was Mormon royalty. He is Mormon royalty in Utah. In order to understand Mike Lee, you have to understand his father. So who was Mike Lee's father? Rex Lee was President Reagan's Solicitor General. He was a principled conservative, but he had an independent streak. And being a Mormon, he believed in minority rights for religions. And when the Reagan administration pressured him on issues involving separation of church and state to endorse government-sponsored prayer and so on, he resisted, and he would not use his office to pursue those cases. And he said that I am the Solicitor General, not the pamphleteer general. So there's an irony there.
Yes, indeed.
So Rex Lee becomes the president of Brigham Young University, which is the principal university in Utah and dean of its law school. And Mike Lee attends both and graduates from both. He's very much in the shadow of his father's legacy. He's elected to the Senate, in great part on the strength of the family name. And he does not like Donald Trump when he rises in 2016. And this is a key part of the story. He endorses Ted Cruz, and he accuses Trump of religious intolerance, of being an authoritarian, and not being a defender of the Constitution. And he remains one of the last holdouts at the Republican convention of 2016. And then, fast enough, he flips.
What happened?
He's scared. He's got to get with the program. It's what we talked about. In its own way, he's susceptible to the fear and the intimidation, and he becomes the Trumper of all Trumpers. Mm-hmm. He
not unlike Cruz, not like a lot of the other people he was with.
Yeah, and not only does he endorse Trump in 2020 and compares him to religious figures among Mormons, especially Captain Moroni, who is
Angel Moroni,
who is the fearless, self-sacrificing leader devoted to the community. Mm-hmm. And he compares Trump to Moroni on the platform. But more than that, he gets involved in the coup plotting for January 6th. He brings along John Eastman, the law professor with the coup scheme for the fraudulent electors scheme to throw out the votes of the Electoral College. And then he strategizes with Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, on how to play the whole thing and how to manipulate state legislators on the fraudulent electors. And he's deeply involved in this coup. So he's implicated. And he knows better. But his particular disgrace is he doesn't act better. He lacks the ability to apologize. Tina Smith, the senator from Minnesota, Democrat, actually confronted him about his hateful tweets personally. He seemed stunned, didn't seem to understand what he had done. He didn't seem to have the kind of ordinary empathy that you would have in the face of such a tragedy. And he doesn't understand. He's repudiated his own religion, the shining figure of Moroni he invokes, but also he's betrayed his father's legacy.
Right. Well, two powerful, ugly in many ways stories. So they converge now around this tragedy, the story of Bolter, the story of Lee. Two different strands, as you say, of the Trumpist regime, Trumpist movement, whatever you want to call it. How do they converge? Show us where the convergence actually happens.
Well, it converges in this incident of murder and assassination, where one is the alleged assassin and the other is, for sure, the character assassin. One's a true believer. The other's a cynical opportunist. One's a loser in the Trump parlance. The other's a winner. And one acts on his, fevered dreams, and the other circulates conspiracy theories he has to know are bogus. Both demonize the opposition as satanic, and one does it out of cynicism. The other actually believes it. Mm-hmm. And one of them is facing now charges of murder, and the other has indicted himself, but he may be acclaimed in the Trump universe. Oh. So there's a tale of two men and a tale of the time of Trump. And I've written this all in The Guardian.
Yes, read Sidney's piece in The Guardian. As Walter Cronkite used to say, that's the way it is right now. For the Court of History and Sidney Blumenthal, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.